David Heurtel. All right, let's talk about a couple of stories in the news today, starting with, I guess, Mark Carney announcing today this new defense spending. It's going to cost us over $9 billion to finally reach what we're supposed to have done, which is 2% of our GDP. What'd you make of what you heard?
Well, I think, first of all, bravo. And it's long overdue. This is basically 10 years overdue. And several points here on how big this is. No fluke that this announcement comes just before the G7 summit in Alberta that begins on Sunday. This is clearly a shot across the bow to Donald Trump, who has attacked Canada a lot because we were not pulling our own weight. But also what it does is that for Mark Carney, who has said very clearly that our relationship with the United States is transformed now and forever, is that, let's remember, around that table at the G7, you're going to have major arms producers like France. France, we may not all know this, but France is the second biggest exporter of arms in the world after the U.S. And we could talk about the UK and other countries that also produce arms. Now, back in the day, if we were going to announce major spending programs in defense, well, you could bet that most of that money would go to the U.S., right, to U.S. defense contractors. Well, not necessarily. So that also means that we are sending a clear message to the rest of the world that we're open for business, and that is another consequence of Donald Trump's treatment of Canada in the trade war. Also, major defense spending is a jobs bill for Canada. This is about transforming our economy as well, because some of this will be manufactured in Canada. This means development of technology. For example, here in Montreal, in and around Montreal, we have a major aeronautics sector. If we're talking about major spending, definitely this will help Canadian industry. Also, the other piece of this is very important. Is we have so much catching up to do, but it's going to be very important to follow this very closely, because with the war in Ukraine, as we've seen following this, just the business of war has changed tremendously. You'll remember last week this daring attack with drones in Russia that destroyed like dozens of long-range bombers, Russian bombers, with tiny, cost-efficient drones hidden in pickup beds, and so 70% of the war now in Ukraine and Russia is being fought through drones. And so it's going to be very important also for us to be very, very mindful of what we're spending this money on, to make sure this is about what defense means, not just now, but 5-10 years from now. And we have to be mindful also that while it is a lot of money, $9 billion, $20 billion, 2%, 5% of GDP, this goes very fast. One fighter jet, whether it's an F-35 or a Dassault Rafale, it's $100 million US per. And so this goes very quickly. And so we're going to have to be very mindful that we're going to need real experts, and pardon the pun borrowed by Christian Dubé, we're going to need real smart, competent top guns to come in and beef up our military, which has lost so many qualified people over the last decade, to make sure that we not only have the money, but the personnel. We're short 15,000 people as it is right now in our military, but we're going to need also the top minds, bring back top people to really make sure that we have all the support, the strategy, to really have a modern military that can contribute not only to our NATO partners when in need, but also for our needs as well over the future.
The issue, of course, becomes, yes, it's a lot of money. The government's not going to have a budget till the fall. You can add this to it. And then if you said, when they go to NATO meetings, right, David, the issue now is we heard from one of the NATO leaders suggesting, well, 2% is not really good.
Sure.
We should go to 5%. So tack on another, as you just said, then it's $20 billion. At some point, do Canadians simply look at this and go, wait a sec, this is out of control, even though it's supporting our military and supporting the industry here or not? not?
I don't see it yet. No. First of all, the polling was very clear during the election. There's plenty of support for more defense spending, and also you have to understand that the Russian threat, and behind that also there's always China and Taiwan and that side of things that's always lurking. But the Russian threat with the U.S. seemingly backing down and not fulfilling its role anymore the way it did under President Biden, the fact is that Europe is going to have to step up in a major way, and it's signaling that it will. And so I think right now, if you're talking about Ukraine, we know this politically. We talked about this during the campaign, even before. Canada's support to Ukraine, with over 1 million Canadians of Ukrainian descent,
right,
as in our citizenship. I mean, we have to, in our citizenry rather, we have to understand that the support is there, but it's beyond the Russian threat in Ukraine. It's a bigger, much more important obligation as we see the U.S. not willing to step up the way it did before in our defense strategy. And the world, let's face it, is a much more dangerous place than it was 5-10 years ago.
Fair. All right. Let me move on and talk about something provincially here. Bill 69 passing under closure. What passed at 4:30 in the morning, apparently? Yeah. That's when this thing finally got passed. And, the interesting, again, I'm not sure I completely understand this. So this basically gives Hydro-Quebec a free mandate, right, and a lot of money to keep laying out as much, electricity as they want to, despite the fact that there's a report suggesting we're not going to need as much as we thought we would need. So they don't seem to be working together. What's this about?
Well, this is about several things. First of all, I read the same reports, and there are certain experts saying, hold on a second, we may not need as much energy today as we once did. But that you have to take that with a grain of salt. What Quebec is looking at right now, and what Quebec's economy has always been about since the 60s, is using hydroelectricity to stimulate Quebec's economy, either through giving Quebecers cheap energy, also attracting industry here and investment and jobs with cheap energy, and also exporting energy. And so we sell to the U.S. and we will continue selling to the U.S. and grow that, and that's a huge sort of revenues for us. Now, we don't have that many cards to play, Aaron, to generate revenues in Quebec. We have our natural resources, we have mining, we have softwood, but major revenues, it's not that like we have that many sources, and the demand for energy is exploding, and it's going to continue to explode. The whole side of this new economy with AI and the power of compute, that takes a ton of energy. And so Michael Sabia's plan is basically going to add 30 to 50% power to our existing grid between now and 2035. And to do that, what Bill 69 does, it takes out a lot of the administrative hurdles and the regulatory hurdles that the Energy Board had in terms of oversight. So it gives much more leeway to Hydro-Quebec to do whatever it wants. It also frees up the possibility for private production to develop. And so now you don't have the hurdle of having to absolutely sell the power you generate privately to hydro for distribution. So if you have excess power in your company and you generate your own power, which happens a lot, you can sell it to your neighbors without having to go through a hydro and regulatory hurdles.
Right.
So, and it also allows Hydro-Quebec to go ahead and finance this massive $200 billion plan. So, and I could go on and on. It's very technical, but the thing is, Aaron, if you look at the next 20, 30, 50 years, the world as we know it is going to need much, much more energy. And Quebec's, if we want, and as we're getting older and more costs for infrastructure, for healthcare, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we don't have that many cards to play to generate the types of revenues we're going to need to pay for all this. And Hydro-Quebec has always been part of that. And we're going to develop more solar, more wind, but we're going to have to look at how we can do more with hydro. But also, it's also the debate about fossils, natural gas, and how do we use the full complement of options. But definitely today, for our own needs, we may not need as much as we thought. But to generate the kind of economic development that we need to pay for everything that we've gotten used to as a society, we need more energy to sell.
All right. You know, it's funny. The opposition is saying this is going to hurt. I mean, they're the opposition. Let's remember that. Yeah. This will hurt small and medium-sized businesses, so we can talk about that another day because we're out of time. David, thank you so much. I appreciate it.